Hari Om Tat Sat. Welcome to Jyotirmayananda Society, our journey to self-realization. Please subscribe our channel for the mystical meanings of the scriptures and to enjoy daily satsang with us. We are currently exploring the book The Mystery of the Soul, Katha Upanishad, commentaries by Swami Jyotirmayananda Maharaj, narrated by myself, Swami Nikhilananda. So today we are studying Mantra 7 from Chapter 2, Section 1. One who possesses an intellect devoid of knowledge, one whose mind is uncontrolled, one who is impure, he cannot attain the abode of the Supreme. He will continue to wander in the world process. So, purity of intellect is the basis of all spiritual movements. When intellect is purified, one beholds the self in its infinite glory. One realizes oneself to be the supreme truth beyond the body and the mind, beyond the senses and the sense objects, beyond the changes and modifications of the world process. But one who has not yet been able to purify his intellect, one whose mind is laden with subconscious complexes, he cannot keep control over the mind and the senses. He will come under the sway of anger, hatred, cravings of various types, and various egoistic expressions. He will be more and more identified with the body, mind, and senses, and therefore he cannot realize the freedom of the self beyond all these. Driven by desires and compelled by the complexes of the subconscious mind, he will continue to incarnate until true inquiry dawns in his mind and he is able to purify his intellect by meditating upon the immortal self. Mantra number 8. But one who is endowed with pure intellect, controlled mind, and wisdom attains the supreme abode of liberation. Having attained that, he is not born again. The body chariot can be used or abused. When abused by the impure intellect and righteous senses, it leads one to repeated birth. Sorry, not righteous senses, riotous senses. They create a riot and go on the wrong track. So then it leads one to repeated births in the world process. But when it is used, one develops an intellect which is free from the blemishes of ignorance. So, purification of intellect is of extreme importance. One lives to understand and to see things in the light of reason. Instead of veiling all perceptions with the silken apparels of sentimentalities, he unveils every perception and analyzes every experience in the light of reason. Thus, he moves from the darkness to the light, from death to immortality, from untruth to truth. The body chariot driven by purified intellect leads the soul to its immortal abode, the state of self realization or nirvana. This is the final goal of life. Once attained, one is not born again. The path leading to the world process is known as Preya Marg, pleasant path. The path leading to the state of liberation is known as Shreya or good path. One should deeply understand the meaning of these mantras in order to drive one's life chariot down the path of blessedness to the abode of the Absolute. Mantra number 9. One who has a pure intellect as his chariot driver and a disciplined mind as his reins crosses the world process and attains the supreme abode of divine Vishnu. It has already been explained that the human personality is like a chariot with the help of which the soul needs to pass through the world process and attain its journey's end, self realization, which is the abode of Lord Vishnu. In this simile, the body is the chariot, the senses are the horses, the mind is the reins, and the intellect is the chariot driver. The soul is being driven in this chariot either to the illusions of the world process or beyond them to the state of liberation. Of course, the purpose of the chariot is to attain absolute freedom from the world of time and space. If a qualified aspirant, his senses are like cultured horses. If one follows through properly and has qualified, they are trained by the practice of pratyahara, which means withdrawal of the senses. They allow themselves to be controlled by the mind and intellect even in the midst of the tempting objects of the world. The mind in such an aspirant functions like a chariot's reins. It has immense strength. When the mind is endowed with enough patience and firmness to keep the senses away from evil objects and drive them towards objects that are propitious for spiritual unfoldment, then it is like the ideal reins handled by a skilled driver. The intellect is the driver of the chariot. If it is not protected by the armor of dispassion and the helmet of discrimination, it will not succeed in crossing the dense forest of the world process, which is abound with highway robbers in the forms of desire, anger, greed, and infatuation. These highway robbers are ever eager to steal the spiritual treasure of bliss and peace from the soul. The individual soul is the owner of the chariot. It needs to be driven across the terrible forests of the world process in order to be free from its repeated wanderings in the cycles of birth and death. When the soul has a pure intellect to drive it, and when this driver holds the reins of a disciplined mind in his hands, then it is drawn by highly cultured horses, the purified senses, to its destination of self realization. This is the supreme abode wherein divine Vishnu, the eternal self, dwells. Having reached this destination, one does not come back to this world process of repeated births and deaths. Mantra 10. The subtle elements are beyond the senses. The mind is beyond the subtle elements, and the intellect transcends the mind. Beyond the intellect, there lies the great soul in the form of the cosmic mind or Hiranyagarbha. Mantra 11. Beyond the cosmic mind, there exists Maya, the unmanifested. Beyond the unmanifested, there exists Purusha, the supreme self. Beyond the Purusha, there is nothing. This Purusha is the supreme limit. This Purusha indeed is the highest goal. By understanding the process of internalization, one attains liberation. Externalization is a process of worldly bondage and entanglement. Therefore, it is important to know what is greater and higher, by the knowledge of which the lesser in one's personality can be effectively controlled, disciplined, and cultured. This mantra gives abundant insight on the path of a spiritual seeker. An aspirant should not exhaust all his energy in battling against his senses. While practicing the withdrawal of the senses, he must adopt the art of culturing his mind by good association, listening to scriptures, concentration, meditation, and spiritual reflection. By elevating his mind, he will be able to control and discipline his senses automatically. Similarly, he should not exhaust himself in subduing the desires of his mind. He must develop subtle reason by the study of the philosophy of the Upanishads. He should sharpen his intellect by Vedantic inquiry into who am I and service of his spiritual preceptor or guru. When the intellect is rendered subtle, he will control his mind and senses most effectively. However, the intellect cannot be controlled if it continues to operate under the pressure of egoistic desires. By mere intellectual effort, one cannot understand the mysteries of life. Intellectualism and that knowledge is limited. It is a means to an end. Therefore, an aspirant must awaken that spiritual faith that transcends reason. He must allow his faith to bloom into intuitive intellect through devotion, surrender, and deep meditation. When the light of intuition begins to shine through the mist of cosmic illusion, the intellect becomes effectively controlled. along with the intellect and mind and senses, are also controlled. Intuitive vision controls the intellect controls the mind, and the mind controls the senses, and thus the chariot of human personality is led on the path of virtue to the goal of self realization. As intuitive intellect blooms to its perfection, the veil of Maya is removed and the soul realizes its identity with the divine self. The revelation of the true nature of the self is the secret source of all disciplines and cultural advancements in human personality as well as in the world. Therefore, all educational and cultural methods should not confine their attention to the world of senses alone. They must seek the higher and still higher levels of existence in human personality until the self is realized. That divine self, which is the goal of the journey of life, is described in the next mantra, mantra number 12, which we will cover in tomorrow's satsang. This is Swami Nikhilananda. Hari Om Tat Sat.